Scotland is a land of legends. Warriors, clans, and ancient traditions. A place where stories feel larger than life. Where myth and history blur together. But how much of what we think we know is actually true? Did clans always look the way we imagine? Were kilts ancient symbols, or later inventions? And is the story of Scotland as straightforward as it seems? Because history, when examined closely, rarely follows the legend. Some beliefs are rooted in truth. Others were reshaped over time. And some were created long after the events themselves. Today, we're uncovering 20 facts about Scotland. Not to repeat the myths, but to question them. To separate story from evidence. Tradition from reality. And to reveal a past that is more complex. More surprising. And far more human than the legend suggests. Painted warriors. A people on the edge of empire. That's how Roman writers described them. The Picts, living beyond the northern frontier of Roman Britain. Wild. Uncivilized. A threat to order. But that's only one perspective. Archaeology tells a different story. Carefully carved symbol stones. Fortified settlements. Evidence of hierarchy, trade, and long-term planning. Not chaos. Structure. Not primitiveness. Complexity. Their symbols remain only partly understood. Suggesting a system of communication we haven't fully decoded. So why were they labeled savages? Because history often reflects the voice of the observer. Not the observed. To Rome, anyone beyond its control was barbarian. But the evidence suggests something else entirely. A society with identity, organization, and meaning. Not a myth of savagery. But a reality far more sophisticated than the label allowed. A symbol of Scotland. Timeless. Or so it seems. The kilt is often imagined as an ancient Highland tradition. Worn for centuries, unchanged. But the reality is different. The familiar, tailored kilt, known as the small kilt, only became widespread in the 18th century. Before that, Highlanders wore the great kilt, a larger, looser garment that functioned as both clothing and blanket. So where did the modern version come from? Industrial practicality. Changing fashion. And, according to some accounts, adaptation for easier movement during labor. Then came something unexpected. After the Jacobite risings, Highland dress was restricted by law. For a time, wearing it was banned. And when the ban was lifted, the kilt returned, but as something new. Standardized. Symbolic. Reinvented. Later, it was embraced as a national identity. Especially during the Romantic revival of Scottish culture in the 18th and 19th centuries. So the kilt isn't ancient in the way many imagine. It's something more complex. A tradition shaped by change. Refined over time. And turned into a symbol long after its origins. A rebel. A symbol. A man of the people. That's how William Wallace is often remembered. A poor farmer rising against oppression. But the evidence tells a different story. Wallace was likely part of the lesser nobility. Not a king. Not a peasant. A landholding family. Connections. Status, though not at the highest level. This matters. Because rebellion in medieval Scotland wasn't random. It required resources. Training. Alliances. Wallace led armies. Negotiated power. Operated within a world of nobles and politics. So why the myth? Because stories simplify. They turn complex figures into symbols. A commoner hero is easier to understand. And easier to celebrate. But the reality is more nuanced. Wallace wasn't an outsider to the system. He was part of it. And his story isn't just about rebellion. It's about power, status, and how history reshapes people into legends. A wall across Britain. A line of division. An edge of empire. That's how Hadrian's Wall is often imagined. A solid barrier keeping the north out. But the reality is more complex. Built under Emperor Hadrian, the wall stretched across northern Britain. Stone, turf, mile castles, and forts. Impressive. Strategic. But not impenetrable. There were gates. Controlled crossings. Regular movement of people and goods. This wasn't just defense. It was management. A system to monitor trade. Control migration. Project power. Not to completely stop movement, but to regulate it. So the wall wasn't the end of the world. It was a filter. A place where Rome didn't just divide. It observed, taxed, and controlled what passed through. Not one. Many. A patchwork of power. Before the idea of a unified Scotland, the land was divided. Picts in the north. Gaels in Dal Riata. Strathclyde Britons in the west. Anglo-Saxon-influenced areas in the south. Each kingdom had its own rulers, culture, and laws. Borders were fluid. Alliances shifted constantly. Scotland wasn't a single identity. It was a mosaic of peoples and politics. Unity came slowly, forged through marriage, war, and negotiation. So the romantic notion of a single, ancient Scotland is more myth than reality. The true story is a land of kingdoms. Each with its own story. Struggling, surviving, and shaping the history we recognize today. Longships on the horizon. Raiding parties. That's the story most people know. But the Vikings did more than plunder, they stayed. In places like Orkney Islands and Hebrides, Norse settlers established permanent communities. They farmed the land. Built villages. Created local governance. Archaeology shows lasting influence. Place names, burial sites, and material culture. The Viking impact wasn't temporary terror. It was a transformation of the landscape and society. So when we imagine Norsemen as only raiders, we miss the bigger picture. They reshaped the north, leaving a legacy that survived long after the last longship sailed. Tartan. Battle cries. Family loyalty. That's the image often associated with Scottish clans. But historical records tell a more complex story. Clans were political networks. Membership could include distant relatives, allies, or even outsiders granted protection. Feuds and shifting loyalties were common. A clan's priority was survival and power, not unconditional loyalty. Marriage, negotiation, and strategy often mattered more than blood. So the romantic idea of clans as tight-knit, loyal families oversimplifies centuries of political maneuvering, alliances, and conflict. The clan system was less about heritage and more about influence, survival, and the delicate balance of power. Redcoats. Highland warriors. A fight for the throne, or so it seems. The Jacobite Rising of 1745 was more than a simple Scottish rebellion against English rule. It drew Highland clans, Lowland Scots, and even some English supporters. Religious divisions, Catholics, Protestants, added another layer. Political loyalty often shifted depending on local interests, promises, and rivalries. Prince Charles Edward Stuart led the cause. But the movement relied on a network of alliances, some unstable, some opportunistic. The outcome wasn't determined by one battle alone, it was the result of fractured loyalties, strategy, and circumstance. So when history tells the story as Scotland versus England, it hides a far more tangled reality. A civil war of competing claims, identities, and ambitions. Where allegiances could change overnight. The wail of the pipes. A symbol of the Highlands. Yet similar instruments existed across Europe long before. Ireland, France, Italy. All had early forms of bagpipes. Scotland refined them. Military use. Ceremonial pageantry. Distinct sound. Distinct identity. But the idea that bagpipes are purely Scottish? That's a later story. Like many cultural icons, they traveled, transformed, and were claimed before becoming a symbol we recognize today. Fires on the hills. Families uprooted. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the Highland clearances forced thousands of Highlanders from their land. Landlords, seeking higher profits from sheep farming, displaced tenants, sometimes violently. Communities that had survived centuries of clan life were broken. Culture, language, and tradition suffered. Some emigrated to Canada, the United States, or Australia. Others were left to rebuild in less fertile areas. The clearances reshaped the Highlands forever. It wasn't just land lost, it was a transformation of society, identity, and memory. Scotland after the clearances was still Highland. But no longer as it had once been. Cobblestone streets. Gas lamps. Ideas that changed the world. In the 18th century, Edinburgh became a hub of philosophy, science, and literature. Thinkers like David Hume and Adam Smith debated, wrote, and published here. The city's universities and salons fostered inquiry and innovation. Topics ranged from economics to ethics, from medicine to political theory. Edinburgh wasn't just Scottish, it influenced Europe and beyond. It challenged tradition, encouraged reason, and questioned authority. So while the Highlands captured romantic imagination, the capital quietly became a beacon of intellect. Enlightenment Edinburgh reminds us that history isn't only battles and kings. Sometimes, it's ideas that shape the future. Words that sound familiar, but mean something different. Scots isn't slang. It's a language with roots stretching back to the Middle Ages. From the lowlands of Scotland to urban centres, Scots developed alongside English, borrowing, adapting, and evolving. It has its own grammar, vocabulary, and literary tradition. Poets like Robert Burns wrote in Scots, capturing culture, humor, and daily life in ways standard English couldn't. Yet today, it's often mistaken for dialect or informal speech. Recognizing Scots means acknowledging a language, a heritage, and a perspective that has endured centuries of change. It's a reminder that Scotland's history isn't only about battles or kings. It's in the words people spoke, and continue to speak, every day. Stone walls. Towers. Dragons? Maybe in stories. The image of a castle as an impenetrable fortress dominates imagination. But in Scotland, many castles were built as noble residences. They displayed wealth and status, hosted feasts and ceremonies, served as administrative centers. Defense mattered, yes, but comfort, prestige, and politics often mattered more. Thick walls weren't always for battle, they were for privacy and influence. So when we picture castles, think beyond moats and sieges. They were homes, symbols, centers of daily life. Not just stone and strategy. Crown. Exile. Execution. Mary, Queen of Scots, is often remembered as a tragic romantic figure. Betrayed, imprisoned, and beheaded. But she was also a shrewd political operator. She navigated alliances, rivalries, and religious tensions across Scotland, France, and England. Her marriages, decisions, and diplomacy weren't just personal, they were strategic. Every move carried weight for her throne and her people. Yet history simplified her story into melodrama. masking her agency and the stakes she faced. Mary wasn't just a victim of circumstance. She was a queen making calculated choices. In a world where power and survival were inseparable. Stripes, checks, and colors. A symbol of family and heritage. We often think each Scottish clan had a unique tartan for centuries. But most patterns were formalized only in the 19th century. Before then, fabrics varied by region, availability, and personal taste. Clans didn't have a fixed, official design. The Romantic revival of Highland culture, fueled by literature and royal interest, solidified these designs. What we now call clan tartans were often creations of fashion and nostalgia. Tartan became identity. But its history shows adaptation, invention, and cultural revival, not ancient continuity. A single kingdom. A shared parliament. Not a battlefield victory. In 1707, the Acts of Union legally united Scotland and England. It wasn't the result of military defeat. It was political negotiation, driven by economics, succession concerns, and diplomacy. Parliamentary votes, agreements, and compromises shaped the Union. Scotland retained its legal system, education, and church. The story of conquest oversimplifies centuries of negotiation and strategy. The Union was a choice, complex, controversial, and consequential. Scotland's integration into Great Britain wasn't imposed by force, it was crafted through politics. With effects still felt today. A shadow in the mist. A creature lurking beneath the waves. The legend of Loch Ness Monster feels ancient. But the modern obsession began in the 1930s. Sightings, photographs, and sensational newspaper stories fueled its fame. Earlier references are scarce and often vague. Talk of water horses or mysterious creatures existed, but not a named monster. Nessie became a global icon. But much of the story is shaped by media, tourism, and imagination. The lake's depths hold mystery, yes. But the creature we know today owes more to 20th century storytelling than medieval legend. Stone halls. Flickering candlelight. Ideas that shaped a continent. During the Enlightenment, Scotland became a hub of learning. Universities in Edinburgh, Glasgow, and St. Andrews attracted scholars from across Europe. Philosophy, medicine, law, and science flourished. Thinkers like David Hume and Adam Smith studied, taught, and debated here. Education wasn't limited to elites. Merit and curiosity mattered. Scotland wasn't just keeping pace, it often led Europe. Its universities fostered inquiry, innovation, and debate that influenced politics, economics, and culture far beyond its borders. Learning here wasn't quiet, it was transformative. And its legacy still echoes in modern thought. Fear. Accusation. Death. Between the 16th and 18th centuries, Scottish witch trials engulfed communities. Thousands of people, mostly women, were accused of witchcraft. Trials could be local or national. Driven by superstition, politics, and social tensions. Punishments were brutal. Execution by hanging or burning was common. Confessions were often extracted under torture. The trials weren't isolated incidents, they were part of a wider European phenomenon. Scotland's witch hunts reflect fear, power, and control. And how society can turn suspicion into deadly justice. It's a reminder that history isn't just about rulers and battles. Sometimes it's about the vulnerable caught in the sweep of fear. Bridges. Ideas. Revolutions of thought. From the 18th century onward, Scotland contributed far beyond its borders. Engineers like James Watt transformed industry with the steam engine. Philosophers like David Hume and Adam Smith reshaped economics and ethics. Scottish innovations weren't just local, they traveled across Europe and the Americas. Medicine, law, and education all benefited from Scottish expertise. The country's impact wasn't accidental. Its universities, networks, and culture of inquiry nurtured thinkers who changed the world. Scotland wasn't just part of history, it helped write it. And its legacy continues to influence our modern world in ways we still feel today. History isn't just about stories. It's about understanding what really happened. Because behind every legend, there's evidence, context, and sometimes, contradiction. The deeper you look, the less simple the past becomes. And that's where it gets interesting. Because sometimes, the truth is far more complex than the legend. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more evidence-based history, where we go beyond the story and look at what actually happened.